Boldwood presents A Racing Murder, written by Frances Evesham and read by Charlotte Strevens. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Couch to 5. Imogen Bishop squinted at the sky. Those black clouds looked about ready to burst, but if Harley, her faithful canine companion for the past year, didn't get his walk right now, he was going to complain all day. One pleading look from the friendly brown mutt's enormous eyes could persuade the most hard-hearted of Imogen's guests to scratch behind his ears, rub his stomach, or even, although the Streamside Hotel's rules forbade the practice, sneak him a mouthful of bacon from breakfast. As a result, he was developing quite a tummy. Imogen fought the tendency with more and longer walks, pleading notices in the hotel foyer and instructions to her hotel staff to police Harley's diet. This morning, she'd been tempted to let him exercise within the hotel grounds. It was a race day at nearby Wincanton Racecourse, and the hotel was full to bursting with racegoers in khaki tweeds, poring over the racing post, arguing over promising newcomers and planning bets, so she had plenty to do. But Harley needed his walk around the village at least twice a day, so Imogen gave in. The early morning February wind had, in a spirit of adventure, morphed from the mild southwesterly of the past few days to a chilly northeasterly, so she marched more briskly than usual down the lane that ran at right angles from Lower Hembrow's single-paved road, Harley by her side. She longed for better weather, so she could walk Harley up Ham Hill. It rose temptingly above the village, only a 10-minute walk away, but the slope from the village was steep, and she'd no intention of climbing up to the country park in this wind. Harley trotted quietly, close to Imogen. After several months of hard work, she'd finally trained him not to pull on the lead, so his sudden bound forward took her by surprise. "Hey! Slow down, Harley! Heel!" She took a tighter grip on the lead, turned a sharp corner in the lane, and stopped dead. She was just in time to avoid cannoning into a short, bald man in horn-rimmed spectacles. Dressed in brand-new running gear that strained over a sizable paunch, he swerved to avoid her, skidded to a halt, and doubled over, wheezing, his round face damp and bright red. Tail wagging furiously, Harley pounced. "Get down! You daft ha'porth!" the man gasped. Harley dropped back onto all fours, leaving 2 muddy paw prints on the man's sweatshirt. Imogen's lips twitched. "When I've got my breath back," panted Adam Hennessy, Imogen's friend and the owner of the Plough Inn, Lower Hembrow's public house, "I'll have something to say about Harley's manners." "You're the only one he ever jumps on. You know he adores you. He chose you when he was astray and wandered into Lower Hembrow. He's happy at the hotel, but he misses you and gets overexcited when you appear. He's perfectly behaved the rest of the time. Well, almost." Imogen's voice tailed away. There'd been an unfortunate cushion-chewing incident last week. Adam's breathing now back to normal, he pulled off his glasses and polished them on his top. "I'll forgive him for trying to bowl me over if you promise not to tell anyone you saw me running. As a pub landlord, I have a reputation to uphold." Imogen considered this. "I didn't exactly see you running," she pointed out. "You appeared round the corner, skidded a bit and stopped, but I'll take your word for it. Are you sure you're not overdoing it? You look shattered." "Nonsense. I'm fitter than you think." Adam squared his shoulders. "Don't forget, I used to be a police officer. I'll have you know, I've passed a few fitness tests in my time." She contemplated his stomach. "Recently?" He chuckled. "Not for years." "Well, don't kill yourself." Imogen looked him up and down. Why the sudden rush to get fit? Oh. A sudden light flashed on in her brain, and she fell silent. They were good friends, she and Adam, but there were some boundaries they hadn't yet crossed. She eyed the new kit. Was this sudden desire to get trim anything to do with Adam's interest in Imogen's friend, Steph Aldred? Take it easy, won't you? We'd all rather have you in one piece than on a slab at the mortuary after a heart attack. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, she grasped the nettle and said, By we, I mean everyone who cares about you, including Steph. Adam looked away, narrowed his eyes, and tapped his smartwatch briskly. Actually, I've been running for a while now. I'm doing couch to 5K. It's a 9-week programme. So, he wasn't yet ready to talk about Steph. She'd let it go for now. I've heard of the programme, but I haven't seen you running before. I try to avoid sightings, hence the early hour and the back lane. How many more weeks do you have to go? 8 and a bit. Out of 9? Nearly there, then, she spluttered. Harley, eager for exercise, pulled on the lead, and they all walked on together. We're on our way to the shop, Imogen said. It'll be open now, and I want a loaf of bread before it all goes. Don't you have bread at the hotel? Adam raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. Why, it's already baked ours for lunch. Imogen grinned. Nice one-upmanship. Gerald, our snooty chef, bakes every morning. He prides himself on his rolls, and the guests love them. But I want a loaf of lovely, unhealthy, sliced white bread for my toast, just for a change. Wyatt would agree. He complains he can't get Texas toast here. Apparently it comes in a special packet and it's extra thick. Imogen groaned and kissed her fingers. That would be perfect. Unfortunately, I don't think Mrs. Topsham sells anything so exotic in the village shop. Warburton's toasty would be the nearest thing. Adam turned back. I'll give the shop a miss today. I'm improperly dressed for shopping and just a bit sweaty. Also, it started to rain. He raised his hand. See you later. As Imogen pushed the shop door, its bell rang cheerfully. She stepped inside. Jenny Trevilian from the nearby farm turned, nodded, and went back to her shopping list. Edwina Topsham, perched on a stool behind the counter, leaned on one elbow, her ample chest engulfing half the worktop, where her present from Llandudno mug of strong brown tea balanced precariously on a roll of toilet paper. She beamed at Imogen over cans of beans, packets of rice, and bottles of sunflower oil. Alfie, the Saturday boy, stopped stacking boxes of apples and grinned. Where's Harley? I tied him up outside. There's not much room in here. Edwina eased herself around the corner. Nonsense, she cried. Bring him in, me dear. We can't leave the poor chap outside, can we? Not in the rain. She bustled across to fling open the door, unhook Harley's lead, and usher him inside. And you, Alfie Croft, can stop gawping and start fronting up those cans if you finish with the fruit. Harley accepted Edwina's enthusiastic hug with no more than a resigned glance at Imogen. At last, Edwina struggled to her feet. Now, what can we do for you, Mrs. Bishop? Running out of supplies, are you? What with all these foreigners up at your place? To Edwina, all visitors from outside South Somerset were foreigners. In fact, the description covered anyone who'd been resident in Lower Hembrow for fewer than 20 years. Imogen had inherited her late father's hotel a little over 12 months ago, but she wasn't a total incomer. She'd lived at the Streamside Hotel as a teenager when her father first bought it. Alfie's eyes slid to Harley, then back to Edwina. Imogen took pity on him. Harley needs dog biscuits. She reached for a box from the nearest shelf and shook it. Harley's ears pricked. She handed the box to Alfie. Will you give him a couple? Not too many, mind. She brushed raindrops from her coat and shivered. You're right, Mrs. Topsham. The hotel's full this weekend. It's not the best weather for racing, though. Don't you believe it? Edwina returned to the counter. Soft going, they call it. It suits some of the horses better than others. Take Butterfly Charm from Leo Murphy's yard, up the road near Misterton. She's running today, and she likes a bit of give in the ground. Leo's offered young Belinda Sandford her first professional ride on the mare. Alfie piped up. My dad says she don't stand a chance. No stammer in that horse, he says. Can't stay the pace. Needs a jockey with the guts to use the whip on the final straight, not some girl. Nonsense. Jenny Trevilian thrust her shopping list in her pocket, juggled a variety of cereal boxes and frowned at Alfie. Young Belinda knows what she's doing. Butterfly's only a 4-year-old, and she needs encouragement, not punishment. You bring a young animal on with kindness. That's my opinion. She dumped the boxes on the counter with her other purchases. Alfie grunted. Jenny Trevilian's word on upbringing was pretty much law in the village. With her husband Joe, she ran the nearby mixed farm, rearing cattle, sheep, pigs, and 6 noisy children with equal fearsome efficiency. In any case, Edwina agreed, the final furlong up Wincanton slopes downwards, and the drainage is good. It's a perfect ride for Belinda. She's the most promising apprentice in Leo Murphy's yard, you know, and a local girl at that. Lower Hembrow born and bred. She glowed with pride. All her mother's family lived here. Imogen was nursing a precious piece of gossip. Now she savoured her moment of triumph. Belinda and her mother are staying at the hotel this weekend. 3 sets of eyes turned her way. In fact, she continued, we have several members of Butterfly Charm's syndicate dining with us. They're very excited, especially Belinda's mother, Diane, of course. Jenny Trevilian beamed smugly. I was at school with Diane Webber. Of course, she's a Sandford now. Maybe I can catch up with her while she's here. Maybe. Secretly, Imogen wondered if that would be wise. Reunions could be horrendous, rekindling all sorts of ancient jealousies and grievances. When Imogen's husband and father had died within weeks of each other, turning her world upside down, she'd met many old school friends for the first time in years. Those encounters had thrown her life into turmoil for months. Still, at least she'd met Steph and Dan again. Her heart flipped over at the thought of Daniel Freeman. It was ridiculous at her age, turning 50, just as she'd decided romance was over, to be as excited as an 18-year-old. She felt a hot blush creeping across her cheeks and quickly bent over, fiddling with Harley's collar to hide her face. No need to give the village grapevine more fertilizer. Chapter 2. Racecourse. That afternoon, the rain stopped and a watery sun shone over the gathered crowds at Wincanton Racecourse. Diane Sandford's stomach clenched with nerves. Her maternal fears never left her. They'd first appeared when she watched Belinda, as a toddler, struggle up a rope ladder on the climbing frame in the park. The terrors flourished when Belinda moved on to her first bike, and almost overwhelmed Diane as her daughter played rugby, swung a hockey stick, and rode her first Shetland pony. But no fear could scramble Diane's stomach more than the thought of Belinda riding the sleek, excitable, head-tossing racehorse Butterfly Charm in today's steeplechase. Her smile stitched firmly in place, Diane wished Rupert, her late husband, were here to experience the agony and pride of watching their daughter in her first professional race. Rupert had encouraged Belinda's love of racing. Diane had never liked horses. They were far too big and strong, with potentially deadly hooves. But nevertheless, she'd kept her share in the horse's ownership syndicate, even after her husband died. She watched, outwardly calm, as Butterfly Charm sashayed round the parade ring for the last time, watching the spectators from the corner of one eye. The beautiful grey lapped up the admiration, as big a diva as an opera singer. She knew all eyes were drawn to her sleek coat and immaculate oiled hooves. Diane would never admit her fear of horses to her horse-mad daughter. She was shielded from the animals today by Belinda and the other owners and trainers in the parade ring, but she still wished she could watch from a safer distance. The bell rang, and the trainers approached for final checks, and to give the jockeys a leg up into the saddle. "Quite a girl, your daughter!" Diane started, as Henry Oxon's voice boomed in her ear. He slipped an arm round her shoulders. "Rupert would be proud." One of Rupert's oldest friends and colleagues, Henry, along with his wife, had been a tower of strength during the depressing months of Rupert's illness and eventual, inevitable death. "Time to get to the rails and watch young Belinda see off the competition." All Henry's statements sounded like commands. Diane accompanied Henry and the other 3 members of the Butterfly Charm Owners' Syndicate to the rails at the edge of the racetrack, close to the finishing post. Henry's wife Ling smiled at Diane. "Look at the odds." She pointed to the line of bookies, whose boards proclaimed which horses were most, and least, fancied to win. Butterfly Charm merited only a humble 25-1. "Belinda's going to surprise everyone." Ling squeezed Diane's arm. "She's an outsider, so no one's expecting her to win. But that's because they don't know her. Their eyes are all on Season's Greetings, the favourite. But I think Belinda's in with a great chance." "I can hardly bear to watch," Diane confessed. "She'll be fine," Henry insisted. His voice grated on Diane's already stretched nerves. All the words used to describe successful barristers applied to Henry. He was confident, gregarious, and clever, with a wide streak of ambition. A very different man from Rupert, who'd spent much of his working life on legal aid cases. Somehow, Diane was never quite sure how, Henry had persuaded Butterfly Charm's trainer, Leo Murphy, to take Belinda on as a stable hand. It was due to merit alone, though, that he'd sponsored her through jockey training and offered her this, her first professional race as a conditional jockey. Belinda was fond of Ling. Sometimes, Diane thought with a spark of envy, she seemed closer to Ling than to her own mother. Nevertheless, Diane would be eternally grateful to Henry and Ling for their friendship, grateful enough to forgive Henry's habits of loudly discussing money, sneering at anyone who hadn't attended public school, and standing always just a little too close for comfort. She stepped sideways, closer to Magnus and Laura Wilson, the other couple with shares in Butterfly Charm. Magnus murmured, "Nervous?" She nodded. "Don't be. Just enjoy yourself. Belinda has nothing to prove. No one expects her to win." Diane managed a smile. "I don't care whether she wins. I just want her to get round safely." Magnus squeezed her arm. "She'll be loving every moment." He turned away, holding a pair of binoculars to his eyes. "Here they come. What a sight!" Just then, as the rain returned, the first horses thundered past on their way to the start. The ground trembled beneath pounding hooves. There was Belinda, crouched forward, eyes straight ahead, focused. Butterfly Charm stretched her legs, glad to be active at last. The Ham Hill Handicap Chase was a 2-mile race with 6 huge jumps, taken twice, and including a dicey-looking water jump. Diane squeezed her eyes shut, terrified at the mere thought of it. Now the horses and riders were at the starting tape, under starters' orders. Diane squinted at the big screen as the flag dropped and the runners headed for the first jump, their jockey silks a riot of colour. Hedge trimmings flew as the horses lifted over the fence. Diane let out her breath. They were all over. Belinda was safe, for now. But there was a long way to go. The crowd gasped. A horse had fallen at the 4th. The jockey, an old pro, curled into a ball for safety and let the rest of the field swerve past. "Not Belinda," Diane muttered under her breath. Not Belinda. Butterfly Charm galloped smoothly, keeping in touch with the front runners, gliding over each obstacle with graceful ease. Diane forced herself to breathe evenly. It was going to be all right. Belinda was round safely and on the second circuit. Another horse fell, unloading his rider, and the field was down to 6, with Butterfly Charm in 4th place. The horses thundered down the track towards the rails, 2 riderless runners by their side. Diane's friends cheered, hoarse with excitement, almost drowning out the commentary. Ling bounced up and down on her toes, shrieking encouragement. Butterfly Charm moved up to 3rd place. There was just 1 more fence to go. Belinda's purple cap bobbed in the air as the elegant grey lengthened her stride and, slowly, inch by inch, overtook the dark bay in front of her. Diane clenched her hands at her chest, the knuckles white. "Go on," she whispered. "Go on, Belinda." Butterfly Charm was at Season's Greeting's shoulder, still fighting, as the 2 horses took off and landed together over the final fence, galloping neck and neck, stride for stride, every sinew straining. Diane gasped. Season's Greeting was tiring. Slowly, Butterfly Charm was moving ahead. Then, unbelievably, she was in the lead, a short head in front of Season's Greetings. Was it all over? No, not yet. The other horse was fighting back. There was a long, downhill run to the finishing post, and Diane knew Butterfly Charm's chief flaw was a lack of speed in the final stretch. Surely Butterfly Charm couldn't possibly win. Diane's heart thudded as Butterfly Charm put on a burst of speed, gaining ground until she was ahead. Astonishingly, against the odds, she was going to win. But then she lurched, she jinked, swerved to the right. Quick as a flash, Belinda switched her whip to her right hand. She touched Butterfly's shoulder, and the horse straightened and speeded up, leaving Season's Greetings in her wake as she thundered past the post in 1st place. Tears of joy sprang to Diane's eyes. Belinda had won! Her first proper race, and she'd won, against all the odds. But something was wrong. The cheering died away. The crowd was murmuring. Diane turned, confused. All around people frowned, shaking their heads. What could be wrong? The loudspeaker blared, and Diane's heart plummeted. There was to be a steward's enquiry. Ling squeezed Diane's arm. What a shame! The queue of punters in front of the bookies broke up into chattering groups. Diane forced herself to breathe. She felt sick. Belinda's first race. Had she won or lost? Diane couldn't tell. It was all in the hands of the stewards. Belinda arrived at the steward's room, her stomach churning. Alex Deacon, the jockey who'd ridden Season's Greetings into 2nd place, was already inside. The steward sat behind a long, polished table. Belinda was ushered to a plain wooden chair a few metres from Alex. Alex, several years older than Belinda, and riding in her 4th professional race, held her racing helmet cradled on her lap. Golden blonde waves flowed over her shoulders. Belinda's own hair had partly escaped from an elastic band on top of her head, and stray wisps, damp with sweat, stuck to her forehead. She wished she'd taken a moment to wash her face and brush her hair. Alex oozed with confidence as they watched a video of the race. She couldn't wait to put her side of the story. Butterfly Charm came up on Season's Greeting's shoulder and began to pull ahead. I knew my horse would make a great finish, and I waited to time it right. But just as I was about to whip him on, Butterfly Charm moved to the right, crossing my path, so I had to pull him up. She glanced at Belinda, flicking her hair back over one shoulder. Belinda kept her eyes on the chief steward, but she could see Alex's smirk. She'd seen her smile like that on the dance floor at young farmers' events. The boys fell for it every time. The chief steward was in his late 50s, a well-built farmer with a reputation for being firm but fair. Even so, Belinda could have sworn his cheeks flushed a little. It was her turn to speak. Leo had trained her for this, but she was still terrified. She thought about Leo's instructions. "Keep it simple," he'd said. "Don't try to be clever." "We came down the straight," she said. "Sorry," said the steward. "Can you speak a little louder?" She swallowed and tried again. "After the last jump, we were neck and neck, and then Butterfly Charm drew ahead." "Yes?" The steward tapped his pen on the table. "And what did you do next?" Do? What had she done? It was all a blur. "I tapped Butterfly with my whip, just once, to encourage her." "Which hand?" asked the chair. Belinda thought back. Horses raced clockwise at Wincanton. "We were on the outside, with Season's Greetings inside, next to the rails, and my whip was in my left hand." She closed her eyes, reliving the heady excitement of the moment. "I tapped Butterfly Charm's flank to keep her going, but she moved in a little to the right. I couldn't see Season's Greetings, for we were well ahead by then." "It didn't hurt, did it, to point that out?" "As soon as I realised my horse had moved to the right, I corrected her." Her voice faded away. She admitted the truth to herself. In a rush of adrenaline, with the finishing post so close, she'd lost control of the horse, just for a split second, and in that instant, Butterfly had drifted. Belinda licked dry lips. The chief steward nodded. "Thank you. I'll ask you both to leave the room and we'll deliberate. We'll make our decision known as soon as possible." Fighting to keep any sign of emotion from her face, Belinda left the room behind her rival. Alex turned and raised an eyebrow. "Not the greatest debut," she said, and her eyes glittered. Belinda bit back a retort. She was sure Alex had deliberately pulled up. "Let's wait for the result," she said. "Oh, yes. My uncle, the racing journalist, is here. The news will be in the evening editions." "You're assuming you'll get the decision?" "Of course," Alex smirked. "You'll learn. Just a rookie error." Belinda looked Alex in the eye. "Did you pull him up deliberately?" Alex leaned in and smiled. "What do you think?" she murmured. She'd known it. Belinda clenched her fist in fury. She longed to slap Alex's smug face. At that moment, a camera whirred. Alex smiled and turned away. "Uncle John! Nice to see you." Smirking, she took her uncle's arm and walked away. After 2 steps, she glanced back over her shoulder. "Can't wait to see that photo in the post." Chapter 3. Dinner. The dining room at the Streamside Hotel buzzed. Diane had booked a table at 7:30 for the Butterfly Charm Syndicate. Belinda had wanted to stay away, but Ling had persuaded her to come. "Win or lose," she'd said, "we always celebrate." Belinda had groaned. "They'll all be so disappointed. I won fairly, I really did." She shook her head. The enquiry had been a nightmare. "Cheer up," Ling said. "That was the most exciting race we've seen all season. Of course we wanted you to win, and we all had a little flutter. But we joined the syndicate for fun, not profit. You did a terrific job to come second." Belinda chewed her lip. She hoped her mother hadn't put money on the race. She could barely afford the annual fees for the syndicate, but insisted on staying in it all the same. Perhaps it was because Dad had been such an enthusiast. Belinda knew Mum was scared of horses, no matter how much she pretended otherwise. Belinda's eyes filled with tears. She wished Dad were here to laugh and wink at her. "It's sport, Belinda, not real life," he'd say, with a hug to show he'd understood his daughter's disappointment. He'd never shared her competitive instincts. As a criminal lawyer, he'd fought hard for truth and justice, and had lost, when necessary, with grace. He'd also had very sharp eyes. Belinda was sure Alex had deliberately held back her horse, making it seem as though Butterfly Charm's small swerve had seriously impeded her progress. Dad would have seen it. Belinda blinked hard and took a breath. Dad would tell her to accept the verdict. It didn't matter that Alex had been sneaky. That was all part of the game, like a clever defence in court. There was no point in sulking. Instead, she made herself sit straight at the elegant table, where every place was set with spotless cutlery and sparkling glass. The champagne was ready, the first bottle already open and nestled enticingly in an ice bucket. Belinda must put on a good face. She stitched on a smile. Henry Oxon raised his glass in her direction. "Remember, you pass the post first. Nobody can take that away from you. A jolly good show for your first professional race, and the stewards recognise that. You haven't been fined or penalised." "Not by the Jockey Club," Belinda admitted. "But I'm sure Leo will have something to say in the yard, although he was kind today." "Stop worrying," Ling said. "It happens to everyone. You told me that yourself." "Not in their first race," Belinda sighed, "with their mother watching, and the syndicate, and Alex laughing at me." She groaned. "I'm sure she held Season's greetings back deliberately to make me look even worse." Then she bit her lip. She was whining, and Dad wouldn't have liked that. Henry was on her side. "Probably. Racing's a battle, Belinda, just like the law. I show my clients in a good light, so I win the case even when I know they're over-egging their side of the argument and maybe even stretching the truth. It's all a game." Ling said, "Belinda's dad didn't see it that way. He wanted to punish the ones who deserved it, not play games just to win." Henry gave a bark of laughter. "Oh, poor old Rupert. A great guy, honest as the day is long, but not really cut out for the real world." Magnus Wilson, an anaesthetist at the local hospital, leaned closer to Belinda. He was a handsome man, about the same age as her father and Henry, and a long-time friend of both. He had the brightest blue eyes Belinda had ever seen, although he hid them behind a pair of silver-rimmed spectacles. He removed the glasses and smiled at her. "Take no notice of Henry. He has no morals. Your dad was a good man, who wanted to make the world a better place." Laura, Magnus's wife, said, "We could use a few more men like that around here." She glared at Henry. There was a short silence. Henry took a breath as though about to speak, but Ling rested a restraining hand on his arm. Just inside the dining room, Imogen was chatting to Emily, her hotel manager. She heard raised voices and glanced across the room, listening, ready to deal with any trouble. The big, red-faced man at Belinda Sandford's table emptied his glass of wine in one long draught. It probably wasn't his first. His tiny wife wore an embroidered silk dress, her hair in an elegant chignon, immaculately neat, complete with a white flower. She smiled at the young girl on the other side of the table. "Don't take any notice of Henry," she advised. "Lawyers love to argue, and even more, they love to win. Henry forgets he's not in court and that he might hurt people's feelings." The big man refilled his glass, laughing loudly. "Quite right, Ling. Take no notice of me, Belinda. Get back on the horse tomorrow. Onwards and upwards, that's the spirit." Imogen raised her eyebrows at Emily. The awkward moment had passed. The staff wouldn't need to break the tension by making inquiries about the food or topping up water glasses. Emily grinned at her boss. "Race days can be tricky," she said. "Owners are either celebrating or commiserating, and whatever's happened, they all drink too much." Although Emily was still in her 20s, she'd run the Streamside Hotel efficiently for several years, First for Councillor Jones, Imogen's father, and now for Imogen. Imogen had soon found she could rely on the younger woman's common sense and experience. Imogen's own area of expertise was the garden. Her gaze slid through the window, enjoying the new floodlighting that lit up the snowdrops, so they mirrored the myriad stars in the night sky. Imogen had brought all her landscaping expertise to bear on the hotel's grounds during the past 6 months, and this year the garden would look wonderful. The earliest of the daffodils were already in bloom under the hawthorn trees by the stream. She breathed a sigh of pure happiness. The bluebells and crocuses would flower soon, and the hectic spring work begin. She'd barely be indoors for the next few months, and there was nowhere she would rather be than outside in the fresh air. She heard a noise in the reception area and turned. Adam Hennessy was hurrying through the lobby, waving, his face serious. Imogen's throat tightened. "Something's wrong," she muttered to Emily, and crossed the foyer. "What is it?" Adam stopped in his tracks. "Came to warn you. The police are on their way. They want to speak to some of your guests. I thought you'd want to head them off, keep things calm." "Too right. The last thing we need is a visit from the police. I suppose it's not just parking offences?"
"No such luck," he said. "Trouble at the racecourse, apparently."
He dropped his voice. "There's a body."
"A what?"
Imogen stiffened. A surge of adrenaline tied a knot in her stomach. Not again. Not another death. It was less than a year since her own husband had been murdered. In a sudden rush of feeling, the rawness and pain of that time returned. Her legs trembled. Adam took her arm and led her to a chair in a quiet corner, almost hidden behind a huge pair of potted ferns.
"Sorry, that was thoughtless. It's no one you know, at least I don't think so. One of the jockeys."
An accident in a race. The knot in Imogen's stomach began to untie itself. This time, the bad news was not for her. Who do they want to speak to?
"According to my old mate James Barton, who rang to let me know."
"The forensic pathologist?"
He nodded. "The police want to talk to Butterfly Charm's jockey."
Imogen jerked her head towards the dining room. "She's having dinner with friends, and they're not too happy. There was an incident during the race, I heard. I'll bring her out to the dining room if I can, without causing a fuss. Belinda, that's her name." He nodded.
"Are you up to it?"
"Of course, it was just the shock. It brought it all back. You know, Greg's death and everything." Shakily, Imogen stood up, squaring her shoulders. "I'm fine now. I'll get Emily to head off the police and take them somewhere quiet." She slipped back into the dining room and murmured in Emily's ear. As ever, the manager caught on fast. She gave a short start and a long stare. "They can use one of the conference rooms." She was already on her way to organise things. Imogen swallowed hard, took a breath, let it out slowly, and approached the guests at the syndicate table. She leaned close to Belinda. "I'm so sorry to disturb you. We need to talk. Would you mind just popping out for a moment?" Belinda turned, frowning. "I'm sorry. What's the matter? Is it the steward's enquiry?" She looked terrified. Imogen said, "Please, don't be alarmed. Come with me and I'll tell you in private. It's too public here." Belinda's eyes slid past her. Already, 1 or 2 diners at other tables had stopped eating and turned towards the syndicate table. Belinda scrambled up, dropping her napkin on the floor. The big man at her table rose to his feet. "Is there something wrong?" he boomed. His wife touched his hand. "Be quiet, Henry," she murmured. "No scenes in the hotel, please." He grunted, hesitated, and subsided. "Can't we have a little peace and quiet while we're eating?" he growled. Belinda followed Imogen from the room, and another woman, Belinda's mother, Diane Sandford, Imogen realised, tagged along with her daughter. The rest of the syndicate exchanged glances, shrugged,
and refilled their glasses. The other diners in the room, losing interest, went back to their meals. Chapter 4. The Plough. Adam was waiting in the entrance foyer. He said, "Emily's taken the police officers to the Hazel conference room. We thought your guests would rather not be escorted by the police." Belinda's eyes were like saucers. "I haven't done anything. Why do the police want me?" "Don't worry, dear." Diane Sandford's hand was at her throat. She seemed almost as anxious as her daughter. Imogen showed them to the conference room and returned to reception. She grabbed Adam's arm. "You better tell me everything you know. Come into the office." He sank into an office chair, eyes gleaming. Imogen had seen that look on his face before. A retired policeman, Adam was never going to lose his fascination with crime. Imogen said, "Thanks for diverting the police. Hardly anyone's noticed they're here." "I thought you'd rather not have a fuss. The body's at the racecourse, and they'll just be asking for a preliminary account from your guest." "Belinda Sandford's her name. She grew up around here. Her mother's a local girl." Adam blinked. "How do you know all that?" She grinned. "You should have come into the shop with me this morning, and then you'd have heard the gossip. Anyway, as the police are here, I assume this unfortunate jockey's death wasn't caused by an accidental fall from a horse." "Nothing so simple. James says the winner of the 3:15 was found with her head stuck in a trough of water in one of the stables. The jockey was a woman, well, a girl, really, someone called Alexandra or Alex Deacon. Apparently, there was a steward's enquiry into the race and your Belinda Sandford was found guilty of tactical obstruction of Alex's horse. That must be why the police want to see her." "And that accounts for the air of gloom at her table this evening," Imogen said. "They glugged down champagne as though there was no tomorrow, but none of them looked as though they were enjoying it. Emily and I thought we'd need to fend off a shouting match. The other people at the table are members of the horses' syndicate. They each own a leg or something." "Ah, interesting." Adam nodded, frowning. "Why especially?" "Stop teasing." He laughed. "Sorry. Trying to maintain my aura of mystery." Imogen smiled. Adam's moon face and twinkling eyes really weren't designed to look mysterious. He said, "I know very little about horse racing, but I've heard that the members of a syndicate share any prize money. They'll be out of pocket over the race." "Aha, I see what you're thinking, a motive." He held up a finger in warning. "We're getting way ahead of ourselves. I imagine this poor woman, Alex Deacon, might have had a heart condition or bumped her head or something. There could be any number of reasons she died." "There's going to be plenty of gossip when the news gets out. If I know Lower Hembrow, the place will be buzzing with speculation by tomorrow." Adam laughed at that. "Tomorrow? I bet it's already a hot topic across the road in the Plough, which reminds me, it's busy over there this evening. I need to get back, reluctant though I am, to drag myself away from the action over here. I'll see what the locals have to say, but I'm not getting involved." He folded his arms. "And what does that snort mean?" "You know you can't wait to start piecing together the evidence." "Not much evidence available at the moment. I'm keeping a beautifully open mind, and I refuse to see murder around every corner. Most unexpected deaths are perfectly innocent. But I need to get back to the pub. It's Saturday night, so it'll be heaving by now. Can you deal with the police?" "We can cope," Imogen smiled. "Emily will keep an eye on the syndicate, make sure there's no trouble. As soon as they've finished eating, she'll spirit them away to take coffee somewhere private. The hotel's bursting at the seams, but I think we have one suite spare, a rather gloomy one that needs redecorating at the back of the hotel. If I know Emily, she'll keep the police well away from the rest of the guests." "Worth her weight in gold, your Emily." "Meanwhile," Imogen said, "I'll go back up and wait to catch Belinda and her mother when the police have finished. I think they'll need strong coffee." Adam crossed the road. enjoying the velvety darkness despite the cold. He loved Lower Hembrow village when it was like this, quiet, peaceful, and 1,000,000 miles away from his former life with the West Midlands Police in Birmingham. The sky had cleared at the end of the day, and the brightest of late February moons glinted, surrounded by the sparkle of millions of stars. He'd made a good decision moving here. Who wouldn't want to live in Somerset? Adam felt he could almost reach up and touch Venus as it dipped below the horizon. He pushed open the door to the plough. Light and noise flooded out, with all the force of a breaking wave. "Here he is!" The voice of the new barman, Rex Croft, soared above the racket. Adam had a soft spot for the Croft family. Rex's younger brother Alfie had named Harley when the stray animal had arrived and adopted him. Harley now lived across the road at the Streamside Hotel. Adam, having never before owned a dog...